Okay. All right, thank you very much. I don't have a tough act to follow, really, do I? I've just got to follow Glenda Jackson. And so I've been listening with great interest. It's a real honour to be invited here. It's a real honour to speak to all of you. And as I sat and listened to people describe the problems that all of your organisations and all of us are facing as we try and do our best for older people in society, alongside the King Lear quote, one thing that came to me is a quote from Hamlet, which is, "We know what we are, but not what we may be." And the job of being a scientist is to imagine what we may be and try and make that happen insofar as we possibly can. And I'll try and walk you through this as quickly as I can. It's intended to have limited scientific knowledge, roughly equivalent to an undergraduate, which means none, combined with the ability to stay awake. Okay? This is the take-home message. All of you and everybody who's ever been alive knows this. Old age has historically been accompanied by ill health, historically. It doesn't have to be that way now. It really does not. We are the most fortunate generation that has ever lived, and we don't even know it, okay? And we are the most fortunate generation because we are the first human beings in the history of human beings who understand how the aging process works, how it relates to ill health, and what we can do to stop the bad stuff and keep the good stuff. But progress is not a law of nature. Death's a law of nature, taxes are almost a law of nature. Progress, regrettably, is not. And it won't happen without us all working together, which is why I'm so proud to be here among so many dedicated organisations with the same goals that my scientific colleagues and I have. I'll walk you through, this is always put up as a problem. It's not. It's a brilliant, brilliant triumph. Look at life expectancy. These are global averages. 1900, the global average life expectancy was 31. 2050, the UN forecasts the global life expectancy will hit 76. This is a pivotal date if you are interested in demography, because 2050 will be the year when there are more old people, defined as being over the age of 65, than young people alive on Earth for the first time ever. And this is an incredible triumph because every old person is a baby that didn't die. Somewhere along the line, that just dropped off the kind of to-do list, yeah? You can be a fan of dead babies or a fan of old people, but by God, you've got to pick one, okay? Not being keen on infant mortality, I am a fan of older people and all they have to offer. And at the moment, I would like to do something about all they have to live with, okay? And one of the things that's also forgotten by, dare I say it, our younger people when they're making commentaries, is how diverse older people are. This is my quick slide from an organisation called Wise Branding, who did the first segmentations of older people. And I've picked a couple of categories. On the one hand, we have these folk who are called the satisfied innovators. Typically middle or upper middle class, good health, socially active, go to the gym, go to the wine bar, interested in change, keeping up to date. These people are doing really well by any standard. And I don't need to worry about them. The other hand, there's these people, the bored and depressed, as they were called. We've heard boredom come up today. It shows the kind of resonance. Former manual workers, dependent on state pension, poor health, multiple medications for their health problems, socially isolated because they can't get out because they feel really ill. They watch lots of TV. I've seen daytime television. If you weren't bored and depressed before, by God, you would be after a week, okay? And this is the situation that is glissaded over, but we all know. Some old people, frankly, are so happy, healthy, and wealthy, they should be helping me, all right? Many of the others are not. And the key determinant, in my view, of happiness is how healthy you are. Yeah, you can still smile if you've got raging toothache, but it's a hell of a lot harder to do, all right? And poor health helps no one. It costs money and it causes a lot of good old-fashioned misery. There's my doom and gloom slide. This talk can be made available. You can fit in whichever one of your own doom and gloom slides makes you feel reassured by it, okay? Most items dispensed by the NHS are spent on older people. Most admissions to the NHS are for older people. And this is rolled out as though older people are hogging the services. Somebody should take to say, they don't want to take the medicines, and if you're over 65, hospital's not a great place. If you're under 65, hospital's not a great place, okay? My job is to crash these costs, because that means we get healthier, happier people, okay? And success, saving babies, brings its own problems. As we've got older, historically, your age is a major risk factor for developing illness. We have more people with chronic conditions, multiple morbidities. By the time somebody is 85, nobody in the population is in perfect health. The average 85-year-old is carrying around about 6 chronic conditions. The numbers vary from 1 to 15. I'm always amused. There are some doctors' surgeries. If you go in, look for these. There's a little sign that says, "Do not come to this doctor's surgery for an appointment with more than 1 condition at a time." Okay, does that mean when I'm old and I've got 15, I'm able to block book the entire day? Okay? And as a result of the benefits of progress that we've made in early life, health costs are going up markedly, but it doesn't have to be like this. We can change it, provided we understand. We communicate the ideas first, and then we look at the actions we need to take. Okay? We've always known that aging increases your vulnerability to functional impairments and to diseases. We now know why it does this and how it does this. And that means that we can do important things for older people if we push on a time scale that is meaningful to people at the front end. And we can do truly radical and transformative things later on. And this is where the science starts, okay? Humans, as you know, are one of a large number of species on this planet. And the overwhelming majority of species on this planet grow old. Not all of them do, okay? But within those species that grow old, you can see a small subset of genes that appear to control how healthy they are. If you mutate these genes in lower organisms like Caenorhabditis, which is that little worm, or insects like Drosophila, you can see massive extensions of lifespan. 2-fold, 3-fold, 10-fold is the best that's ever been achieved. And these animals live much longer because they're much healthier, okay? Ill health doesn't just make you feel rough, it kills you, okay? So if you're healthy, you tend to live longer. And those genes, or versions of those genes, are also found in mammals like mice, and they're also found in us. I sequenced my own genome in June. And I don't know if that is an example of care for my own health or a kind of molecular level narcissism. I'm still grappling with that. And to my delight, I found that I carry one of these beneficial FOXO3A alleles. So I will not be cluttering you up in a daycare center and shuffling along. I will just carry on and drop dead. Okay? Knowing what's happening here, okay, knowing the molecular underpinnings of health allows us to reimagine what the relationship between aging and disease is really like. Because everybody prior to us has speculated on it, okay? Only we know. And this is what it's like. Rather than thinking of aging mechanisms or disease-specific mechanisms, there are a very few mechanisms operating in cats and dogs and flies and worms and you and me that act to keep us healthy. And problems arise when they start to fail. Some of those problems we've chosen to label as diseases, cardiovascular disease, Okay? I actually have elevated early hypertension, which is now treated. Okay? 30 years ago, they would have called it benign hypertension, said, "It's your age, dear," or something like that. Note the elders speak, cutting in as my hair declined, okay, and told me to get on with it. So some of these negative changes we've chosen to label as diseases. Some of them we think of as natural changes, and some of them we find hard to put in a bin, like immunosenescence, okay? But the mechanisms that cause cardiovascular disease in my blood vessels and cause wrinkles in my skin are exactly the same, okay? And scientists both here and in the US realize this now. And this is just a little schematic that was done a couple of years ago for a meeting of the different National Institutes of Health in the US that I was privileged to attend, okay? What's lying underneath this? What can we do? This is a kind of paw print of your health maintenance mechanisms. And we first started to probe this, first with the mutants, and then with drugs that mimicked some of the effects of what the mutants did. And this should have caused far more excitement than it did. Quite a few years ago now, one of these drugs, a compound called Rapamycin, was found to extend the lifespan of mice. It extends it by about 20%. And the reason it extends the lifespan of mice is that it makes the mice much healthier, because it actually interacts with some components of the network that the original mutants were found in. So rapamycin treatment makes these animals healthier, okay, in a wide variety of different ways. There's a great deal of hope that targeting these pathways will allow us to do something relatively quickly about things like cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease, because rapamycin is a drug. I know that may sound a little bit odd, but the human race only has about 1,500 drugs. That's everything in the medicine chest, and that includes morphine and aspirin. So the fact that something that produces these kind of health improvement effects is in every pharmacy, in every hospital in the country, and is off patent, it costs about £10 a day. It's very helpful, okay? If you're interested in how it works, there you go. It wouldn't be a proper biochemistry talk if I didn't do this. This will be on the exam. I normally say that to worry the students. There'll be a test later. It's quite complicated, but essentially it works a bit like a long-suffering mother. Okay, that's my wife. And the way to think about it is, if any of you've had kids of an age where they can play with Lego, you all know this. Your child loves nothing more than new Lego kits. They can buy them, they can follow the instructions, they can make whatever it is. Lego buffs may be interested to know that's a B-wing fighter, apparently. There we go. Okay, and they will keep doing this. They will keep making new Lego kits as long as you keep forking over the money. If you call a halt to this, and they want to make something new, they will do it by breaking down one of the Lego models they've made already and making something else. Cells work exactly like this, okay? What we call formally de novo protein synthesis, where you take amino acids and stick them together to make new proteins, is really cheap and easy. If you don't have enough protein for some reason, you are forced to recycle stuff. And that's how these long-lived mutants work. The mutants are mutants in the machinery that senses proteins. And so the cells think they don't have any. So they keep very efficiently disassembling stuff. Rapamycin basically bungs up the machinery that senses whether or not free amino acids are available. And so it forces cells to break down different used up components. So in essence, you live as long as you recycle efficiently, which is very pleasing. There are simple things we can do right now as well. As many of you will probably know, breaking your hip, even if you're a previously healthy older person, is not good news. All right? You have a very high chance of picking up a very, very nasty post-hospitalization infection, weeks and weeks potentially in intensive care, and a high likelihood of death. This is because you lose the ability, as you get older, to make a hormone called DHEAS. And we're very hopeful about this because the precursor to DHEAS, a hormone called DHEA, can be given orally. And if you do that, what you find is that you can restore the function of those components of your immune system that go around killing bacteria. So what we're hoping will happen, and this is work from Professor Janet Lord at the University of Birmingham, is that we can dramatically reduce the frequency of bacterial infections, get people on their feet, get them re-enabled, get them where they want to be at home with their family and their social networks again. That would be a really helpful thing. And these are a couple of minor bits and pieces that are going on. Other things are a little bit closer to home. I have most of my rather limited academic reputation for my work with human accelerated aging diseases, particularly a disease called Werner's syndrome. For the avoidance of doubt, the gentleman nearest to me in that picture is the one with Werner's syndrome. The other one just has a weight problem and a really bad 1980s tie that I don't wear anymore, but thought was really, really cool. And yeah, they were, look, it was on Have I Got News for You? All right, they all wore them. Okay, and what we found, Werner's syndrome is caused by something we call the premature senescence of cells. That's kind of my life's work in a sentence, okay? And what we have been able to do is we have been able to identify a class of chemical compounds. They're not quite drugs. They're at that one stage below licensing, which will rescue this growth deficit. So the reason my colleague there doesn't look very well, and we're both the same age in that photo, we're both 30 actually, is because his cells are becoming senescent about 5 times faster than mine. This drug will stop that dead. What we think we can use it for, and I was over in Japan a couple of years ago, which has the highest percentage of Werner's syndrome patients, is that we can use it to improve the health of these patients in very specific ways. They get very severe ulcers, okay? And so we're expecting that what we may be able to do is get a trial going, get these ulcers closed over, get them fit and independent again. And I am talking to one of the companies that makes these class of compounds at the moment, okay? This is my entry into senescent cells. What is happening to my colleague there is happening to you and me as well. It's just happening, in his case, rather faster. If we are able to remove senescent cells, we greatly improve health. This can only be done in animals at the moment, but it represents a massive breakthrough. I'll try and show you what I mean. You don't have to be an expert, I think, on mice to realize that the mouse on the top looks a little bit healthier than the mouse on the bottom. Those two mice are exactly the same age. They were both made from embryonic stem cells, and they carry a very specific genetic construct which destroys their senescent cells when they're formed, provided the animal is given a triggering compound in its drinking water. And so you can do 2 classes of very interesting experiment, because this is a test bed system, okay? And which one you find more interesting is a direct function of how old you are. You can remove senescent cells all the way through the animal's lifespan, and undergraduates tend to really like that one. Or for people of a certain age like me, you can let the animal fill up with senescent cells. Then you can delete them, and you can say what happens. And in both cases, you see an enormous improvement in the animal's health. All right? And there are a variety of markers that are used, learning and memory, a variety of biochemical parameters. The one I like most is one of the simplest, which is just voluntary wheel running. Okay? The animals are in cages, you just let them run on a wheel like a pet mouse. And as I hope you can see, the animals that have had their senescent cells removed run much further and much harder than their non-removed counterparts. And the reason is really simple. No one's forcing these animals to run. They're running because they feel better and want to get out, okay? And if you scale that up a little bit to older people, which is what I'm mostly interested in, those would be the kind of results you would get. Being able to run for 12 minutes instead of 6, being able to cover over a kilometre instead of a few hundred metres. That slide and that treatment is the difference between institutionalisation and remaining independent, living in your own home. That would be a 30 to 40 year journey. And the example that I use is tamoxifen. Okay? It took 40 years from synthesis of tamoxifen to unequivocal demonstration that tamoxifen reduced mortality in breast cancer. But I think most people would agree that that was a 40-year journey that was worth taking. Okay? And by the same token, we stand as a scientific community in this field at the start of a similar 40-year journey. Okay? So the stuff we can do now, stuff we can do later, stuff we can do a long way in the future. All right. So what can you do to help us? And I'll talk a little bit about some bits and pieces that may be of interest, and what can we do to help you. I'm always asked about 3 different types of lifestyle intervention whenever I'm on TV or at parties or things. Beauty products, exercise, and diet. I will let the beauty product results speak for itself, and I say whatever I say normally, which is I use no beauty products. Okay? Exercise is a bit of a double-edged sword, really. I'm incredibly keen on exercise, personally. I have, however, become less keen on watching older people being beaten up for not taking it. Okay? I am very, very tired of what I see as a blame culture that is beginning to emerge. And I'll try and illustrate it here. On the left, you can see some folk from a sports science department. They're the kind of people who are always doing, HIIT training for older people. On the right, you can see a reasonable age spectrum of typical gym goers. The youngest is Lucy, who's right next to me. All of those gym goers, including Lucy, are carrying injuries. I think anybody who goes to a gym will listen to a little bit of cognitive dissonance as you sit down to go into classes. People say, oh yeah, fitness is incredibly good for you. And then everybody will start complaining about the cruciate ligament they've pulled, the arm that isn't working, okay? And this is the point I want to bang home. Exercise is marvelous, provided you can do it. If you have arthritis, it's really hard to maintain levels of physical function. I know there's tremendous work that we can do in this sector around adapting Tai Chi classes, around those kind of things. But it's not as though somebody who is in poor physical condition with a large chronic load of disease chose to be unfit. It's really unfair to suggest they do. The other one is diet, okay? Diet's a lot of fun. There's lots and lots of evidence of beneficial effects on some foods, and there's less good evidence for others. This is one I particularly like, actually. Most of you will probably have read somewhere that fish oil is beneficial for cognition. Okay, this is where I, don't worry too much about it, because this is the result of a very significant study using older people who were IQ tested in the late 1930s. And if you look at the IQs of that cohort of people, you see that all the people with high IQs are taking fish oil. Aha, you say, IQ is clear, fish oil is clearly protective. What you don't know is their IQ at age 11. If you subtract their IQ at age 11 from their IQ at age 85, the protective effect of fish oil disappears. What's going on is this. Fish oil doesn't make you a bright, self-aware, health-interested person. Bright, self-aware, health-interested people scan the paper looking to see what they should be taking. See, somebody said fish oil's good for me. Oh, I'd better get on that. This confounds an awful lot of the diet and health advice that we get. However, there is plenty of evidence that some things really are beneficial for you. There's a colleague of mine in the States, a lady called Barbara Shuckett-Hale, who pioneered a lot of this work. And it's very clear in rats and mice and older people that supplementation with fruits or berries or nuts or even caffeine at appropriate doses or coffee at appropriate doses will improve memory, it will improve ability to do tasks, it will do these kinds of things. We were doing a live panel last year, actually, Barbara and I, and she turned around and said, it seems to me that it's almost as if, what something looks like tells you what what it's good for. She said, so for example, walnuts are really, really good for your brain. What do you think, Richard? And I looked at all this data and I had jet lag and I said, I don't really, I think I probably didn't have enough bananas, Barbara. But there's no doubt that fruit and vegetables are really, really good for you. However, and this is the however, only if you can afford them at the doses where they're beneficial. To get the kind of effects you see in supplementation, you'd have to spend about £900 eating blueberries. And if you're worrying about whether or, being £138 a week after rent, all of which you've spent on blueberries, okay? But what this says, and this is where I think the science needs to go, we know that something or a combination of those things is mediating those beneficial effects. And if we dig into it, it should be a relatively doable job to sort it out, work out what the components are, and start delivering them not as fruit, but as supplements into something the way you would. People have done this before. That's where vitamins came from, effectively. It's just working out what will get along that way. That can happen. Okay. So, what can a bright, sensible, 17%er do to help the bored and depressed? I'll give you a slightly radical suggestion here. And it's one that just sits below the surface. Okay? Which is, look at this place. Human well-being is not limited by stuff. All right? Human well-being is not limited by stuff. Human well-being is not limited by money. I'll show you what I mean. Okay. Which of these two worlds would you rather live in? There's 1860s Liverpool, which my great-grandparents would have lived in, or sub-Saharan Africa today. If you look at under 5 mortality per 1,000 live births, almost 50% in 19th century Liverpool, about 15% in sub-Saharan Africa. Birth trauma, lower in sub-Saharan Africa. Vascular disease, lower in sub-Saharan Africa. TB, absent, and smallpox, absent in sub-Saharan Africa. Malaria, absent in Liverpool, but that's because there's no mosquitoes. Income, the people of Liverpool in adjusted dollars in the 19th century are about 1.75 times better off than the people in sub-Saharan Africa today. And this underlies an important message about science. The richest person in the world today cannot purchase a drug that will add 30 years to their lifespan. Why? Because it doesn't exist yet. Okay? And so what limits human well-being is not stuff, because the amount of stuff on the planet hasn't changed in the last 200,000 years. We have exactly the same stuff that Homo sapiens had when they first evolved. Okay? It's put together in infinitely more clever ways. And the great thing about ideas is that ideas can be duplicated at negligible cost. There is a whole branch of economics about this. The only limits to growth are the limits of our imagination. Okay? And so you could say that science is the best international aid you can buy. It actually isn't, but I'd be happy to tell you which one is. But it's very close to it. And how are we then doing in the purchase of ideas? Not as well as we could do. This is a kind of visual field test as well. That's the spend on, in the UK, on research into different diseases, okay? And the little blob down there is how much we spend on looking at the fundamental mechanisms that keep us all healthy. It's not a great amount. If you look in the US, that's how much is spent per sufferer of disease on the different diseases and on the mechanisms that are making them all happen. And this slide is a little old now, I must kind of update it. But this is what's going on roughly in the UK. That roughly is the national budget. It's shrunk now. That's the cost on the NHS. That's the estimated cost of ageing unsuccessfully to the NHS, 42 billion. That's the total science budget. That is not a fly that has landed on the screen. That is the ageing research budget. You know, I humbly suggest that we could do a lot to make sure that to make sure that your daycare centres have fewer people needing to access them with a little bit more money. And that would be a good thing. So should we actually all be scared globally of success? I don't think so. There are various scenarios that politicians worry about, but it's only an existential worry. They worry, as one MP's aide said to me, about the 200-year-old pensioner. And what they're worried about is the nightmare scenario at the bottom, where you reach the age of about 75 and you spend the next 250 years with arthritis, okay? That is not going to happen, okay? It's based on our lived experience of what it's like to be old, but that will not happen unless humans are completely different to every other species we've studied, okay? More likely, and both of these can happen, is that we will see a compression of ill health, so that rather than spending, 5 years in ill health, perhaps we only spend 5 months, or a lengthening of the healthy period, still keeping the period of ill health the same. Either or a combination of those is quite plausible based on what we know about playing around with health in later life in lower organisms, including mice. Okay? What would that actually mean to humanity? And there's been very, very little done on this to date, but what's been done has been done at UCLA, actually. And all that this economic study did was it took some of the lower end of the improvements in health that we can deliver to animals in the lab and said, okay, what happens if you can deliver those to the clinic? And how do they stack up against delaying cancer, delaying heart disease, whatever? Improving health was the biggest winner, okay? The improvements in health, based on what we know about what happens in animal populations, do not increase the number of disabled people. It dramatically crashes it. And the calculated social benefit is extremely large. It's $7 trillion out to 2050 net. Okay, it's for gross, about 4 trillion net. And that stacks up very favorably with the social benefit costs on either delaying cancer or delaying heart disease. How much is $4 trillion? To try and give you a scale of that, it's about a third to a quarter of the total benefit from the UN Millennium Development Goals of the last period that closed. The UN spent $2.4 trillion attempting to generate social benefit. It did a magnificent job. It fell short of its goals. It spent $2.4 trillion, generated $15 trillion in social benefit. And that's real things like halving the number of people in poverty. Okay? In financial terms, it's 43% of all the gold ever mined. It's enough to get everybody 30 years worth of clean drinking water. It's about 2% of global wealth. Okay? And so, as I said, it's a very tough time right now. I've been an Age UK trustee. I'd stopped being it a couple of years ago. I know how hard it is to try and deliver services, to look after the people who really need us, and to bang your head against things where the only response seems to be there isn't any money available. Work more creatively. Okay, which to my mind is a little bit, it's the fiscal equivalent of saying to a little boy, you know, there aren't any toilets on the motorway for the next 20 miles, sing a song. You know, just not drip, drip, drop little April showers, please, because we've just had the car cleaned. Okay, if we push hard, it won't last. Something will give, and people will listen to us, and these things will get done. But I would like to give history a shove, personally, because I don't want to wait as long as it takes for, as Glenda said, somebody eventually to wake up and take notice. I normally find that people take notice rather more if you shout, which is kind of what I've done. I'll close off one more thing, which is people talk about aging research as though we go around trying to make people immortal. We don't. I like to think we offer something better to people, which is the chance to spend more of your life contented, useful, and interesting to know, which I like to think is what most people actually want. So if you have any questions, I've left a few minutes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Richard?
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. But what it doesn't address is I understood that life expectancy is now falling because of obesity.
That's, you have to be incredibly careful with life expectancy measures, because they're very, very twitchy, all right? And you would also have to be careful with scale. Globally, life expectancies are continuing to increase very markedly. You will find variance from place to place, but often that variance corrects. There has been a steady upward trajectory in life expectancy that isn't set to falter. So the two statements are not irreconcilable, and you have to look quite closely at what's going on. So things like, for example, wars or heavy infant mortality will also crash life expectancy. And you have to, you know, assigning causes to a shift in life expectancy is always a matter of sticking a pin, or as a lot of times a matter of sticking a pin in what you think is a probable cause. Okay, so, yeah.
Any other questions? I think we can have time for about two.
Andy Newman, Counterpoint Dance. What's the set of first and best international aid that you mentioned you were going to tell us?
Okay, okay, pet subject. Better rights and reproductive choice for women, which is something I am enormously on side with. Thank you for asking a softball question. It generates, I regret to say it, but handing out the pill, better rights for women, better pre- and postnatal care generates 5 times, well actually no, it doesn't generate 5 times, generates 20 times the social return that's been invested in R&D, okay? That having been said, if it generated half that, I still think it was worth doing. It generates $120 for every dollar invested. There you go. Okay, go girls.
I don't know if we can follow that, but is there one more question? There's one more from Mick over here.
Thanks. It's not exactly a question, but what I'd like to say is...
this might not exactly be an answer then, but never...
It's great to hear something that's optimistic. We keep hearing about the care crisis and never being able to afford to care for people with long-term health conditions. But it's nice to be working in an area where there's a clear sense that there can be progress, and that the sort of work we're doing can be contributory to that. So I'd just like to say thank you for giving us an uplifting presentation.
Thank you. I mean, it is a very true point. It's something that actually I'm very keen that we need to address. And it came back to, I don't know who raised the point about what can we do. Psychologically, people are people. Nobody wants to invest in what's seen as a losing cause. not emotionally, not psychologically. People just want to go away from it. Anybody who's facing inevitable bereavement kind of gets that psychological withdrawal kind of thing. Saying things are bad right now and will never get better, so suck it up and pay the bill, could be truthful. Saying things are bad right now, suck it up and pay the bill, and a fraction of 1% more, and you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of social good, is an awful lot easier sell. It also has one amazing thing which is useful in politics but not essential, which is it happens to also be true. Okay, so thank you. Thank you guys. I know how hard you work. I've seen it myself. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Professor Richard Faragher. Fantastic. Thank you.